So it's been a little while since I showed up and made a video. It's kind of been a crazy couple of months. And some of that is to do with retrogrades. And I want to talk about retrogrades today and kind of start to talk about demystifying the retrograde, because I think we have this very doom and gloom style of looking at retrogrades instead of understanding retrogrades for what they truly are, which is a way to reflect. So we are about to have 5 planets in retrograde. We've had Saturn, Neptune, Pluto, and Venus in retrograde for at least the last month, longer than that. But today, Mercury goes into retrograde, and then at the end of or start of next week, Uranus goes into retrograde. So let's talk about what these retrogrades are. So I think I've mentioned some of these retrogrades before in passing. So we've got Saturn retrograding in Pisces. We have Mercury about to retrograde in Virgo. We've got Neptune retrograding in Pisces. We've got Pluto retrograding in Capricorn, and we've got Venus retrograding in Leo. So let's kind of talk about what the vibe is there. Now, when we start talking about retrogrades and looking at the general vibe, what we're looking at is the collective energy of it. We are just looking at how the skies are currently affecting the collective, right? And not specifically at how it might affect your rising sign, your sun sign, or your moon sign. And so when we talk about these particular retrogrades, what we're looking at is just the overall kind of vibe. So if we look at the Saturn retrograde in Pisces, Pisces naturally rules our 12th house. Saturn looks at limitations, boundaries, authority, how we embody those. And Saturn also looks at how we set goals. So our 12th house is all about connecting to the unconscious. It's connecting to kind of karmic stuff. It's where we start to see our psychic faculties. So the energy of this particular retrograde of Saturn in Pisces is looking at where we're putting limitations around our intuition, around our big dreams, around how we actually express kind of our psychic abilities, or even how we take on authority in the metaphysical realm, right? How we look at gurus, teachers, coaches, things like that might also come up as a reflection in this particular retrograde. Now, to understand how this retrograde is really going to affect us, we want to look at where Saturn is in our chart and where Pisces is in our chart. So if I were to look at this for myself, Pisces is my 6th house. So the retrograde is not just looking at how I look at things intuitively, like through the 12th house, but it's also looking at how I look at things in my 6th house. But my Saturn placement is in my 5th house, right? So we start to add these layers, and it makes the understanding of how that energy affects us very different. Now, that's just Saturn. If we look at Pluto and Capricorn, we're looking at what goals do I have? Are they still in alignment with where I want to go? Do I want to change things up? Am I where I want to be? Do I want to kind of do my career? Do I want to look at what my ambitions are? Are my ambitions even my own, or are they still things that I'm playing with from other people? That's kind of the vibe of the Pluto retrograde. And then if we look at the Venus retrograde in Leo, how am I expressing myself? How am I putting myself into the world? How do I look at my relationships and my self-expression within my relationships? How do I look at my aesthetic? How do I look at all of these things? And then if we start looking at Neptune's retrograde in Pisces, we're looking at how we take our connection to our intuition and our dreams and that kind of universal connection to the next layer. But the retrograde I want to focus on the most is, I think, the retrograde that gets the worst fucking rep, and that's the Mercury retrograde. And everybody and their sister that I have seen talking about the Mercury retrograde on TikTok, on Instagram, and Facebook are talking about how this one's going to be a particular doozy. And I don't see it this way, right? When we start talking about this Mercury retrograde, right? If we break it down to the collective energy of the Mercury retrograde, Mercury is retrograding in Virgo. Virgo is naturally ruled by Mercury, so it's kind of going to have a little bit of that more amplification effect, because these two energies tend to work together. Now, if we look at Virgo as a sign in itself, it's a lot of detail, data analysis, discernment, grounding. It's about how we organize our thoughts, how we look at the world, things like that. But Virgo rules our 6th house. So Virgo is also about how we show up for other people, how we show up for ourselves, health and wellness and things like that. And so if we look at this Mercury retrograde, the overall vibe of it is asking the question of, how do I discern my needs? How do I discern other people's needs? How do I communicate those with other people? And what kind of service do I want to be in for these other people, and how do I want to communicate with them about all of that? And additionally, are all of these needs being met within myself? And so then if we start to take it a step further and we look at Virgo in other placements of our chart, right? Because if we're a Libra rising, Virgo's our 12th house if we're using whole sign, right? And that's the modality I use. But so if we look at all of the other energies, like if Virgo is our 7th house, we're not just going to be looking at how we're in service to other people and just the nature of our 6th house. We're also going to be looking at how that Virgo energy is affecting our 7th house. And, you know, depending on where our Mercury placement is, like that Mercury retrograde energy is also going to have a little bit of a different flavor, right? Similar vibe, just different flavors. So like my Mercury placement is in my 11th house of Leo. So this Mercury retrograde is having me kind of step back and ask the question of, okay, what does it look like for me to communicate in groups, for me to be in service to groups? What does it look like for me to be in support of these groups? How do I discern what groups work with me and what groups don't? How do I communicate those needs? How, if I'm running a business, do I build those groups in a way that is going to serve people in the desire that I have, right? So when we start layering all of these on this and we take this approach, it's more like these periods of retrogrades are great reflection opportunities, right? Uranus is about to go into retrograde in Taurus. So we're looking at how we look at technology as a material comfort. What are we using technology for in terms of making money? Do we have a belief around the current financial system? Like, do we think that banks should be dismantled? Like, how do we feel about cryptocurrency, right? The other thing too with Uranus is when we start looking at that, Uranus is also a huge paradigm shifter. So Uranus in Taurus right now is probably the reason that we're looking at a little bit of our financial sector and being like, what the fuck, right? But the energy of that in Taurus allows us to have those reflections around those particular things, right? We can also ask, is my current comfort zone around material possessions and things like that where it needs to be? Or do things need to shift? What kind of paradigm am I exploring when it comes to my finances? So these retrogrades are not these doom and gloom spaces. They are opportunities for us to step back and look at what we really need as individuals, what the energy we need is, and how we can go about rechanging that. So like, if we look at the Pluto and Capricorn situation, what do I want to do? Do I want to continue working a 9-to-5, or do I want to start my own business? Or do I want to leave the fact that I've been running my business for so many years and go back to a 9-to-5? Things like that are coming up. And these are the questions we want to ask. So when we're looking at this Mercury retrograde that literally starts today, and literally starts in an hour, when we look at this particular retrograde, what we're looking at is, how am I communicating my mental needs? How am I communicating how I look at data? How am I communicating my discernment? How am I calling people out on the shit that I don't believe that, like, how am I calling people out when I don't think they're telling the truth? Like, what is the energy of my communication style? What is the energy of how I am expressing this curiosity? What is the energy of how I'm serving other people? And is it still the way I want to do it? And then we can layer it in even further, right? So let's say you are a Libra rising and Virgo is your 12th house. Okay, how are you expressing the fact that your intuition is a very mental experience for you? Do you need to reevaluate that particular experience? Do you need to like look at it in a new way? So these retrogrades are not doom and gloom. They are opportunities for growth and reflection. And I highly recommend, if you are interested in astrology at all, or you have been doing astrology, is go look at your placements and use them as ways to come up with journal prompts. Like, one of the things I'm going to do for myself is, how do I want to communicate about service? How do I want to communicate about my goals? How do I want to communicate about how I see the world and what I need? How am I going to communicate about my interests? How am I going to communicate how I want to show up for service for other people, right? If you're a business owner, this is the perfect time for you to step back and look at your offerings and say, is this service actually giving my clients what I want them to get? Right? One of the reasons I haven't shown up on YouTube for the past couple of weeks is because I've been getting ready for this Mercury retrograde and asking myself, what foundations do I need to have built so that my business communicates what I'm desiring it to communicate. What am I building in terms of service to support other people? And that's going to be huge over the next 4 weeks. Is how are you communicating your health and wellness needs? How are you meeting health and wellness needs? And if you have an interest in health and wellness, what do you need to be able to step into learning more and exploring that particular mental side of that? And so with that, with this Mercury retrograde, I highly recommend that you sit and maybe Google what Mercury feels like and what Virgo feels like and see where it is in your chart and look at those particular houses and aspects and come up with journal questions to help you see the pathway forward and reflect, so that come like September, what is it? September like 28th or something like that. Come September when the retrograde's over, you can be like, okay, I have a new foundation for how I'm going to serve other people. Let's fucking go. And so if you're anything like me, I'm going to go back to the drawing board. I'm going to look at all of my services yet again and start figuring out what that foundational service and help looks like. And if you're interested in learning more about any of this, 1, subscribe to my channel, and 2, please feel free to shoot me an email at any time. And I will see you guys in the video next week.